Never enough to be enough for me. In my reflection, I am incomplete. I only see what I will never be. But I don't have to be perfect, 'cause you already are. So take heart, my weary soul. I will keep holding on till God give me eyes to see all that you've always seen. Take heart, my weary soul. I will keep holding on till God give me eyes to see all that you've always seen in me. Discovering who I am and who you are. Before I could speak, you spoke into the dark. Before I could breathe, you purified my heart. And I don't have to be perfect, 'cause you already are. Yeah. Take heart, my weary soul. I will keep holding on to you. God, give me eyes to see all that you've always seen. Take heart, my weary soul. I will keep holding on to you. God, give me eyes to see all that you've always seen. You gave your life for me. It cost you everything. God, give me eyes to see all that you've always seen. You gave your life for me. It cost you everything. God, give me eyes to see all that you've always seen in me. You call me worthy. Your love defines me. Now I know who I am. No, I won't chase it. I'll just receive it. I'll rest in who you are. You call me worthy. Your love defines me. Now I know who I am. No, I won't chase it. I'll just receive it. I'll rest in who you are. I'll rest in who you are. Forgetting my past and walking in the light. I'm rid of the fears that once controlled my life. Nothing can steal what's already mine. Oh, you call me perfect, 'cause that's just who you are.
Hey, Glad to have you back this week as we're continuing in our second week of the series Focus. Last week we looked at what it looked like to keep in context what is behind us as we are focused on what is ahead. And today I want to talk about this idea of focusing on the now. And when I hear that and when I talk about that, I think about when I am tickling my kids. Now, I know that seems like a really weird like metaphor, analogy, or illustration to share, but when I start tickling them, like there's always these moments where like we're having a good time. I'm laughing, they're laughing. It's kind of fun for all of us. Now, if I try to tickle my wife, it's never fun because she just immediately gets angry. But with my kids, like there's this moment where like this is like chipper, fun laughter and like running through the fields and like happiness is existing. And then there's always that moment where you can tell where it's not funny anymore, where it's like I'm done. And usually I'll like go past that moment a little bit and it'll make them a little frustrated and upset. It's pretty fun to tickle them all for different reasons because one of my kids has this weird deal where as soon as you tickle him, he falls to the floor. And he's actually in the room with me when I'm filming this, and so he knows that it's him. But when I immediately tickle him, he just falls. It's like he loses. It's like fainting goats. He loses complete movement of his body and just goes to the floor. But there's always that moment where it's like, I'm done. It's not funny anymore. And like I said, with Amy, it comes about the third second. I think with my kids we can go more like 21 or 22, but there's always that moment where it's like something's changed. And in the story that I'm going to talk to you about today, there is kind of that moment where like, oh, okay, in this moment something has changed. And it's the story of you've heard this so many times, probably. I'm assuming that most of you have heard something about this, but it's a story of David and Goliath, but it's really a story about David, Saul, and Goliath. And, it's the story of David who, everyone assumes because of some of the stuff that scripture says that he was not maybe the most attractive person. It's hard to really tell by some of the stuff that it talks about, or that there was something about him that made him appear maybe not as attractive. But it's the story of when he is coming to like bring some stuff to his brothers, and he's supposed to bring grain and things like that, and also bring some cheese to the commander. And I think it's weird that if you're going to take your brothers something in battle that you take cheese or a dairy product in biblical times, but whatever. And so he gets there and there's these conversations because this guy named Goliath has shown up, this Philistine, and he's considered to be a giant. Now, what's funny is, as if you've had any Bible in your life ever, you've heard the story that Goliath was 10 foot tall, or Goliath was 9.5 feet tall, and he had 4 brothers just like him that was super tall. There's a little bit of, not controversy, but there's discussion over how tall he really was. Like how tall was he for real? And so we don't know exactly because there are like 3 like old biblical texts. 2 of them list his, it's saying that he was 4 cubits in a span. One of them says that he was 6 cubits in a span. Now, a cubit was about the distance between your elbow and the tip of your middle finger. So approximately 18 inches. The thing is that that's different for everyone really. A span was about like from this part of your thumb to the outer part of your pinky with your hand like stretched wide. And so it's a little subjective, like it could be different on other people, but because there are different texts, even though one text kind of seems to win out, and that's the one that puts him at about 9 foot 9 inches, which is just ridiculously tall. There's other ones that put him closer to being 7 foot, and some of them even shorter than 7 foot, in the 6 foot range. Now, I don't know how tall he was. I know that back in this day, like because of what they've been able to discover, the average height was about 5'4", 5'5", something like that. And so I'm 6'2", so I would be considered tall. Now, I don't think that considers giant back in this time, and that's why most people go with the 9 foot 9 inch, like that there was an obvious height. But let's just say that whatever it was, that this dude was big. and that he comes from a people that were big and a heritage of people that were big and all that kind of stuff. And so he comes out and he is talking all kind of trash to the people of God. And, you know, as Saul, as he is there and he is trying to figure out what to do, David gets there and David begins to ask all these questions and basically make these statements. And people are looking at him like, wait, is David calling us out? Like, is David wondering why, you know, we're not already doing something? Like, it's just like this thing where it's like, who's this dude? Like, what is David talking about? So they bring him to talk to Saul. And so he starts saying this stuff to Saul, and Saul's like, hey. And David starts telling him all the stuff that he used to do as a shepherd, like who he used to like battle against, like, you know, with people that came against his sheep. And he's like, basically, if I did it for that, I could do it with him. Saul's like, done. And so Saul basically gives him this armor. You know, the armor's too big. He goes out, he finds 5 stones. Long story short, kills Goliath, this whole deal. And these are kind of the stories that we have heard. Now, I want to read a portion of that passage to you as I've tried to sum up a lot of what happened in there. I want to kind of bring it to just kind of bring it to into focus a little bit different. But this is in 1 Samuel chapter 17. This is verse 38, and we're going to read through 40. So it says, then Saul clothed David with his armor. So Saul is giving David his armor. He put a helmet of bronze on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. And David strapped his sword over his armor, and he tried in vain to go, for he had not tested them. Then David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. So David put them off. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in his shepherd's pouch. The sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. So we get to this part, and you see that basically, like, David's like, I'm in. Like, put me in. I'm going against this gigantic person of a man who is talking all kind of trash to my people, talking all trash to the people that are leading me, like all kinds of stuff. People are freaking out. David gets to this point where it's recognized that Saul is saying, you go take care of it. You say that you've got this. Let's put this in your hands. And so he gives him his armor. Now, it was obviously too big for him. It was obviously not made for him, this armor that he had. And so so Saul is like putting it on him. And it must have been a really awkward scene to see like David like chilling. He was bringing grain and cheese to his brothers. And then all of a sudden he has got this stuff that he is putting on himself, and Saul's putting it on. And it's obvious that it doesn't fit him. And so David's like, look, I haven't tried this on before. This is not a rough draft. Like, I got to go out and do this thing. This is not working for me. And so what does he do? He goes and he gets, you know, he's got the pouch and the sling, and he goes and gets the 5 stones, and he goes out and he wins. Okay, now, why is this so important? He had this idea, or Saul had this idea, that what's going to protect you, David, is going to be my stuff that I have used in the past. That I'm going to bring this stuff, and this is going to be what is going to protect you in the future. Or, I'm sorry, what is going to protect you now is what has protected me in the past. And David is like, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. So David put them off. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones. Now, what do you think is happening as all these other people are looking at him, wondering, you're about to go fight this guy that we're all scared of. He is talking all kinds of trash. That is a mountain of an individual. And you're taking off some of the stuff that Saul is saying is going to protect you. And you're like, take it all off. And what does he take? He takes the things that he was aware of and the things that he knew. He took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in his shepherd's pouch, the sling in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. So instead of his protection being based around something that was from someone else's past, or from the past, he chose what he knew now, walking into the situation he knew. It's basically this. David had to take off the armor, but he was most protected when he put on what God had given him for this moment. See, he took off the armor that was really not built for him. It was not made for him. It was not sized for him. It was not his. It was very clunky. It was very confusing, and he could not do. It basically said that he tried in vain to go, for he had not tested him. He tried in vain to go. He couldn't move like he was supposed to. He was most protected with the staff and the stones and the sling, because that is what God had given him in this moment. In the now, David took off someone else's past, and he was able to walk forward in that. Now, why is this even important to us? You know, we looked last week at what it meant to look into the past and recognizing and reflecting on and like celebrating the past, but not letting that ever distract us or be our focal point, that we had to continue to be moving forward as we celebrated what we have learned through what has happened in the past. In this idea of the now, we have this picture of this incredible moment where David was up against something that was a very challenging situation. This has been my advice to David. Okay, if I were David, I'd be like, go home. And he'd be like, listen, I'm supposed to do this. I'm like, go home. David probably would have said something like, God's telling me to do this. I'd have been like, listen, boy, go home. You're not dressed for it. You're not ready for it. You've already said that you've not been tested for it. I would have been the one that had been like, David, get out. Like, you just need to go, take your cheese, take your grain, take your charcuterie board, and just go ahead and go and do something else. But what David knew in this moment is that he didn't need Saul's armor. He didn't need something that represented someone else's past. He knew that what he had in this moment, in his now, he knew that he had what God had given him, that he was skilled in, and that he knew that he had this trust in God and trust in the now of what God had provided for him. You know, even in going, people are like, well, why did he have the 5 stones? And there's a lot of opinions. It was like, because you got Goliath and you had his 4 brothers. So that was 5. I don't know. There's all these, like, not rumors, but like these legends of like the stone speaking out to him and stuff like that. I have no clue why there were 5 or any of that stuff. Here's what I do know. David was able to walk forward into the now, trusting God and also trusting what God had given him in the now, for the now. And it says all this stuff, and it says, in the sling in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. He stepped up. He stepped up to the Philistine. Now, I don't know, I really have no clue what that moment would have been like. If I'm walking up, let's just say he was 9'9". If I'm walking up to that moment, I'm wondering, do I have enough faith in God to think that this staff, this pouch, this sling, and these 5 stones are going to do the trick with a dude that is tricked out in armor and all the stuff that it talks about how big how big his army was and how tall he was and how big he was. Like, I can't even imagine that moment. But here's what David did. David approached it, stood right there, and did what he was supposed to do. Trusted God. He trusted what had been given him in the now, and he stepped up. So for us, I believe that, one, I'm not trying to say that we're the David. I'm not trying to say that the thing that is in your life is your giant. I'm not trying to say that hardship or that conflict is Goliath, is the giant in your life. Here's what I am trying to say. That there's a lesson and then there's a truth that we can learn from this, and that is this. Is that we don't need to try to do the things that God has given us, and we don't have to try to do things in life with someone else's past or with the things that someone else tries to give us that don't fit who we are. Now you're going, now does that mean that we can't learn and can't gain wisdom from other people? No, that's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is David, what was being trying to give into him didn't fit him, didn't make sense for him. It couldn't move forward with someone else's past, with someone else's armor, with someone else's stuff. And I believe that when God has us step up to that line, that of course there's wisdom and things from other people that we're able to get. But we've got to make sure that we're evaluating and looking at the now and saying this, is this from God, the God that I trust? And is what I'm taking in and what I'm taking on, are these things that fit me? Are these things that are being given to me from God for the now that fit who I am? That make sense, that allow me to move and to to flex and to step up and to be who I am supposed to be? Or do they weigh me down? Are they awkward for me? And do they not allow me to go? See, that's the truth, I believe, is that God, in these moments where we're able to step up and move forward, I believe that he provides us with things that he goes like David, when he says this, he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in his shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. What did he do? He took what God had given him and what God had provided for him now, and then approached the Philistine. I believe that there are things in our life that God has given us for the now. Resources and tools and people where it makes sense. It's not clunky. It's not awkward for us. It makes sense for us. What God is putting in our life now. We're not trying to do something just the way that someone else does it, or not trying to put on just what other people have. We are looking at protection, not being putting all this other stuff on that doesn't make sense. We are putting on and we are taking with us what God has given us for now. The tools and resources and things that God has given us for now, and moving forward and stepping up, because it says, and he approached the Philistine, and he didn't approach it with Saul's stuff. He didn't approach it with his brother's stuff. He didn't approach it trying to match what the Philistine had. He knew what God had given him for this moment, for the now. And he approached and he stepped up with that. And I believe that in the way that we move through life and the way that we move through this year as a church and as individuals, as families, is we get to evaluate, what has God given us for the now? What resources, what tools, what people, what wisdom has he given us for now that does make sense for me as an individual, that does make sense for me as a family, does make sense for us as a small group, and does make sense for us as a community and as a church and as the church. What has he given me that makes sense as I step up in this area? What has he given me that makes sense for the now? And I know it's from him. As I trust him, I know that it is from him. And it's not just something else I'm trying to make happen because it worked for someone else or it sounded good. It's because I know and I've evaluated, I've connected to God in such a way that I know that he has given these things to me now. See, the moment when I tickled my kids was, there's that moment where I knew something shifted and changed. And I believe when Saul gave that armor to David, and David was like, nah, just take it all off. I'm going to get the stuff that I know has been given to me to take care of this situation. There had to be that moment where everybody went, ooh, that's okay. See, something shifted right there. Everything changed right there when basically David took off the armor that Saul was trying to give him, and he realized he was most protected when he put on and took with him what God had given him. And I believe that's the lesson for now. I believe that's the lesson for us for now, is that we get to move forward in that same way. So as you get done today, and as you get a chance to answer some questions, I'm going to ask you to look on the screen. It's going to give you a few things to think through. And then we're going to try to do exactly what we did last week, which is when you're done with your time, with your discussion, with your family or whoever you're around, or even if it's just you, we're going to leave the chat room open for a while, for like 30, 35 minutes, because I'd love to hear your responses, love to hear and learn, for all of us to kind of learn from what you are learning through this passage and what you are learning through this instance and what you are learning as we focus on the now. What is God giving you now to be able to step up to what you're stepping up to? Even though we're not David, we're not saying anything as the giant, what can we learn from this passage in the way that David handled this in his response to God and who he was, what he was given, and the way he walked forward in the now? So spend some time for discussing these questions, and then love for you to include in the chat room things that you were discovering and things that you were learning, things that you were talking about, and we would love to interact with those. Hey, listen, have an incredible day. Thank you for hanging out with us, and we can't wait to see you next week. All right, you guys have a great day.